reason why people call Sophie Cunningham MAGA Barbie, and people are starting to fill the arenas to watch her and Caitlin Clark. She's not apologizing for saying that there should be no men in this woman's sport. It's caused an absolute crisis. People are losing their mind. Photo of Brittney Griner with a full beard after being released from a Russian prison.
The WNBA's Brittney Griner is a man.
Men should not play sports against women. I'm not going to get into all the bullshit that's going on out here in the world today. If anybody thinks that...
Just hours ago, the Associated Press broke a story that the entire sports world is now talking about. The WNBA has officially ruled that former NBA players Enes Kanter Freedom and Royce White are not eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft. But here is the thing that makes this decision a bombshell. The WNBA made the call anonymously, through unnamed league sources, refused to explain the criteria they used, and still has not publicly defined what the word woman means inside their own collective bargaining agreement. The same CBA they signed in March 2026 that says only players who are women are eligible to play in the WNBA. One sentence, no definition. And right now, every sports outlet in America is asking the same question. How does a league make a formal eligibility ruling without explaining the rule? By the end of this video, you are going to understand the full story of how the WNBA arrived at this exact moment, what the policy actually says, how this whole debate started, what the players and coaches have said publicly, what the legal experts are now warning about, and what has to happen next if the league wants to put this controversy behind it before the playoffs begin. And stay with me, because at the 10-minute mark, I am going to show you the specific legal and institutional gap at the center of all of this, that the mainstream conversation is completely skipping over. And it is the thing that determines whether today's ruling actually resolves anything or just creates bigger problems down the road. To understand why today's ruling matters so much, you have to go back to the beginning of the 2026 WNBA season and trace exactly how the league went from a commercially thriving 30-year-old institution, celebrating its biggest season ever, to a sport that has spent the better part of 2 months at the center of a national political firestorm. The spark was an ESPN profile of Indiana Fever guard Sophie Cunningham, published on July 21, 2026. In that profile, Cunningham spoke openly about her belief that transgender girls and women should not compete in girls' and women's sports. She pushed back against the characterization that her views amounted to hating transgender people. She said she never once said that, and that she tries to extend love alongside honesty about what she believes. The profile immediately created a media storm. The league was thrust into a debate it had not been asked to officially weigh in on before, and the reason for that is simple and important. No transgender woman has ever played in the WNBA. The debate was entirely hypothetical. There was no active eligibility case, no pending application, no real-world situation requiring a formal policy determination. There was a player's opinion and a country that was already deeply divided on the topic. But hypothetical debates in sports have a way of becoming real very quickly when political actors decide to use them. And that is exactly what happened. Former NBA player and political activist Enes Kanter Freedom announced in late July that he identified as a woman and intended to declare for the 2027 WNBA draft. Former NBA player and Republican Minnesota Senate candidate Royce White made the same announcement in a Fox News interview, saying he identified as sometimes identifying as a woman for the purpose of professional basketball. Both men were explicit that their declarations were intended to make a political point, not to genuinely seek a roster spot. The WNBA, facing a situation it had never encountered before, convened a task force, issued a memo from Commissioner Kathy Engelbert acknowledging the complexity of the issue, and waited until today. Here is exactly what the ruling says, and, critically, what it does not say, because the gap between those two things is the entire story. According to an Associated Press source, speaking on condition of anonymity because of the sensitive nature of the situation, Freedom and White are not eligible for the WNBA draft. The WNBA's official statement, released through Front Office Sports, said Freedom and White are not eligible to play in the WNBA and characterized their declarations as publicity stunts designed to mock the league and demean and marginalize others. The league added that it will not give oxygen to efforts designed to exploit the topic and will not allow outside pressure or manufactured controversy to dictate league processes. Those are strong words from a league that has been notably silent on this issue for weeks. But here is where it gets complicated, in ways that matter for what comes next. The ruling was delivered anonymously. The WNBA has not issued a formal public statement under its own name. Commissioner Engelbert has not held a press conference. No spokesperson has gone on record. The criteria used to rule Freedom and White ineligible have not been disclosed. The CBA language, only players who are women are eligible to play in the WNBA, still contains no definition of the term woman. The league declared 2 men ineligible without explaining whether that determination was based on biological sex, gender identity, a combination of factors, or something else entirely. And that silence, as multiple legal analysts have now noted publicly, creates more questions than the ruling answers. Outkick formally sent the WNBA a list of questions asking them to define their criteria on the record. As of this recording, the league has not responded. Now let's look at the other side of this debate, because it deserves to be treated seriously and fairly, and the people on both sides of it are making real arguments that real people are wrestling with. The case for a clear biological sex-based eligibility rule in women's professional sports rests on well-documented physiological research. The scientific consensus, including positions from the British Journal of Sports Medicine and numerous peer-reviewed studies, is that individuals who go through male puberty retain measurable physiological advantages in muscle mass, bone density, lung capacity, and cardiovascular performance, even after years of hormone therapy. This is not a fringe position. It is the basis for policies adopted by World Athletics, World Aquatics, the International Olympic Committee in 2026, and the Supreme Court's ruling in West Virginia versus BPJ earlier this year. The case on the other side, for inclusion policies that account for hormone levels and transition timelines, is also grounded in research. Some studies show that after sufficient hormone therapy, performance gaps narrow significantly. The WNBA itself has non-binary players in its history. Lacia Clarendon and A.D. Durr both played in the league, though both were assigned female at birth. And legal scholars at Sportico have noted this week that a blanket exclusion of transgender women without a published policy could create legal exposure for the league, because the CBA's vague language could theoretically be challenged under antitrust law or equal protection arguments if a legitimate transgender athlete, not a political stunt like Freedom and White, were ever to seek entry. Here is the rhetorical question that cuts through all the political noise and gets to the real institutional problem. If the league was always going to rule Freedom and White ineligible, and it clearly was, because nobody seriously believed either man was going to put in the work to compete at WNBA level, why does the WNBA not have a published eligibility policy that explains that determination transparently? That absence is not an accident. It is the product of years of institutional avoidance of a question that was always going to arrive eventually. Here is the big picture that connects everything. And this is the number I teased at the start of this video, the thing that reframes the entire story. Remember that open loop I planted in the first 45 seconds? Here it comes. The WNBA's 2026 collective bargaining agreement runs to hundreds of pages. It covers salaries, benefits, travel conditions, player conduct, league governance, and dozens of other operational details with remarkable specificity. Article XIII, Section 1 contains the eligibility language. The entire definition of who can play in this league is one sentence. Only players who are women are eligible to play in the WNBA. One sentence in a document, hundreds of pages long. No definition of woman, no criteria for determination. No appeals process, no mechanism for handling edge cases. Every other major professional sports league that has faced this question, World Athletics, World Aquatics, World Rugby, the IOC, has at some point been forced to publish specific criteria, even if those criteria have been revised over time. The WNBA has not, and the reason that matters so much right now is that the league just made a formal eligibility ruling, declared two named individuals ineligible, without being able to point to a published rule that explains the basis for that determination. That is not just a communications problem. That is a structural policy gap that will create legal exposure if a genuine eligibility case, not a stunt from two former NBA players, ever reaches the league's door. The closest historical parallel in American sport is the IOC's handling of testosterone regulations in the early 2010s, when the organization made case-by-case determinations without a coherent published framework, was eventually sued, and was forced by the Court of Arbitration for Sport to develop and publish specific criteria. The 1BA is heading toward the same moment, and it has not prepared for it. Today's ruling answered the immediate question about freedom and white. It did not answer the underlying question that Cunningham's ESPN profile, the political firestorm, and a summer of controversy have made impossible to avoid. Here is what everyone is missing in this entire conversation, and I need you to hear both of these points clearly, because they change how you think about where this goes from here. The first thing nobody is connecting properly: the WNBA's task force that was convened after the controversy began is the same task force that is handling officiating improvements, player safety protocols, and league expansion governance. This is not a dedicated policy body focused on eligibility questions. It is an already stretched institutional structure, being asked to resolve one of the most legally and politically complex questions in professional sport, on top of everything else it is managing during the most commercially successful season in league history. That context tells you why the league's response has been slow, reactive, and communicated through anonymous sources rather than formal public statements. The second thing nobody is properly addressing: Caitlin Clark's position on this debate has been deliberately non-committal in a way that is actually the most strategically sophisticated response any player in the WNBA has given. When reporters pressed her after the August 2nd Lynx game, she said it is for leagues and governing bodies to work with their athletes to find solutions. She said it was not something discussed in the locker room and that the team's focus was on basketball. Clark has the most to lose commercially from being associated with either side of this debate. Her sponsor relationships span audiences from every political background. Her non-answer is not cowardice. It is the most accurate answer available. This is genuinely a policy question for institutions, not a question that individual players should be forced to answer in a post-game press conference. And the WNBA's failure to have a published policy is what keeps putting players like Clark in that impossible position. Think about this. Do you think the 1BA needs to publish a clear, detailed eligibility policy before the 2027 draft? Or should they continue handling cases through anonymous league sources? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because I want to see where this audience lands. My verdict on the 1BA's handling of this entire situation is this: today's ruling was the right decision on the specific question of freedom and white, but the way it was delivered was an institutional failure that makes the underlying problem worse rather than better. Here is reason 1. Declaring two individuals ineligible through anonymous sources without a published rule is exactly the kind of ambiguity that invites the next bad faith stunt. Because anyone who wants to exploit the league's policy gap can simply point to the lack of transparency and say the league is making it up as it goes. A published rule eliminates that opening. Reason 2. The players who spoke publicly on this topic: Cunningham, the players who wore Trans Kids Belong shirts, the players who publicly supported the league's inclusive ethos, all deserve a clear institutional framework, rather than being left to carry the weight of a debate the league has not resolved at the governance level. Making individual players the face of a policy dispute is not fair to anyone on any side of it. Reason 3. The 1BA has too much commercial momentum in 2026 to let this policy gap persist into 2027. The new television deal, the expansion franchises, the record attendance and ratings, all of that is built on institutional credibility. A league that cannot or will not publish its eligibility criteria is a league that looks reactive and inconsistent to the sponsors, broadcasters, and partners who have staked real money on its future. The strongest counter to my take is that publishing a detailed policy on this topic invites a different kind of political attack. That whatever the WNBA writes, one side of the debate will use it as ammunition. I understand that concern, but the alternative, making eligibility rulings through unnamed sources with no published criteria, is already producing exactly that result, just without any of the transparency that a formal policy would provide. 3 predictions for what happens next. Prediction 1. The 1BA publishes a formal, detailed eligibility policy before the start of the 2027 season that defines the criteria used to determine eligibility and includes a published appeals process. Time frame: by end of 2026 or early 2027. Confidence: high. Today's ruling has made the absence of that policy the central question in the story, and the legal pressure alone will push the league toward formalization. Prediction 2. Sophie Cunningham's public profile, sponsorships, media appearances, social media following continues to grow as a direct result of the summer-long controversy, making her one of the most recognized 1BA players in the country, regardless of her on-court role. Time frame: by end of 2026. Confidence: high. The commercial reality of her platform is already at 3.8 million Instagram followers, and nothing about the last month has reversed that trajectory. Prediction 3. The bold one. A genuine eligibility case involving a transgender athlete who is not making a political stunt arrives at the 1BA's door before the 2028 season, forcing the league to apply its forthcoming policy in a real-world context for the first time in league history. Time frame: 2027-2028. Confidence: low to medium. This is the natural trajectory of the policy gap the league has left open, and as women's sports grow globally, the probability of a genuine eligibility question arriving increases every season. Here is what to watch over the next few weeks as this story develops. First, watch whether the 1BA issues a formal public statement under its own name explaining the criteria used to rule Freedom and White ineligible. If they do, it signals the league is moving toward a published policy framework. If they do not, it signals continued institutional avoidance that will create more problems in 2027. Second, watch Commissioner Engelbert's next scheduled public appearance. She has been notably absent from press conferences on this specific topic, communicating instead through memos and anonymous sources. Whether she addresses it directly on the record is the single clearest signal of how the league plans to move forward. Third, watch the legal analysis that emerges from the Sportico and sports law communities in the next 10 days. The question of whether the league's CBA language creates antitrust or equal protection exposure is not a political question. It is a legal one, and the answer will shape what the WNBA has to do next, regardless of anyone's personal position on the underlying debate. The next video is going deep on the Indiana Fever's complete playoff picture, every seeding scenario, who they want to face in round 1, and why the bracket draw could be the most important 30 minutes of the Fever's entire season. The single most important thing to take away from everything in this video is that the 1BA made the right call on Freedom and White today, but left the underlying question completely unanswered. And a league that makes eligibility rulings without published criteria is a league that is one real-world case away from a crisis it is not prepared for. If you want analysis that goes past the political noise and gives you the institutional and legal context behind the biggest stories in women's basketball, subscribe right now. I do this every single week. Final question for the comments. Should the WNBA publish a detailed, specific eligibility policy before the 2027 draft? Yes or no? Drop your answer below and tell me why. One more thing I want to add, because it has been almost entirely absent from the hot take coverage of this story. The players who have been most directly affected by all of this controversy: Cunningham by being the one whose comments ignited the firestorm, Clark by being the one reporters keep asking to weigh in, Aaliyah Boston and the rest of the Fever locker room by playing through a season that has been surrounded by non-basketball noise since July. None of them asked for this debate to arrive on their doorstep during what is supposed to be the most important stretch of their professional basketball season. Cunningham expressed her views in an ESPN profile. That is her right. But the political actors who seized on those views to turn the 1BA into a battleground, the former NBA players making bad faith draft declarations, the commentators suggesting Clark and Cunningham should quit for safety reasons, the Fox News coverage that reached 206 segments in a single summer, none of that serves the players, the league, or the genuine policy questions that deserve serious consideration. The 1BA's eligibility policy is a real institutional question worth answering carefully and transparently. What happened this summer was that real question getting wrapped in bad faith political theater that made it harder, not easier, to answer. Today's ruling cut through the theater on the immediate question. Now the league needs to do the harder work of building the policy framework that makes the next version of this question answerable on its merits rather than through anonymous sources speaking to wire services. That is the work that matters, and the clock on doing it properly has been ticking all summer. The 1BA is 30 years old this season. It has survived lockouts, low salaries, low attendance, skeptics, and 30 years of being told it would not make it. It has produced some of the greatest athletes in the history of sport. It just signed a $2.2 billion television deal. It is in the middle of its most commercially successful season in history. It deserves an institutional governance structure that matches the scale of what it has become. Publishing a clear eligibility policy is not a political act. It is a basic requirement of running a professional sports league at this level. And the players, Cunningham, Clark, Boston, every woman in every 1BA locker room, deserve to play in a league that has done that work so that they never have to be the ones left holding the microphone when reporters ask what the rule is. That is the standard this league should be holding itself to. Today was a start. Now do the rest of the work. Subscribe so you do not miss the next video when the league finally puts something in writing, because that breakdown is going to be one of the most important institutional analyses this channel has ever done. And trust me, when it drops, you are going to want to have seen this one first. It is all connected, and the full picture is only starting to come into focus right now. The ruling came down today. The real story starts tomorrow. Do not miss what comes next. I will see you there. Subscribe now so the algorithm makes sure of it. The W1BA made a ruling today. Now it needs to make a rule. There is a difference, and that difference is everything.